Bonk's Adventure, known as PC Genjin in Japan and BC Kid in Europe. It's a scrolling platform game developed by Red Company and Atlus and released in 1989 in Japan and 1990 in North America for the PC Engine / Turbo Grafx-16. The game was ported to the NES and Amiga as well. Bonk was re-released for the Turbo Duo in 1992 on the 4-in-1 Super CD game CD-ROM. Despite never owning a Turbo Grafx as a child, I did actually play this game once or twice over a cousin's house shortly after it was released. I had a good impression of it then. Let's see how well it holds up in 2022. Note, I played this game on the Turbo Grafx Mini, not an actual Turbo Grafx-16 console. Graphics, 7 out of 10. The sprites and backgrounds are colorful and have some charm and detail. The bosses are huge, and the reactions to being hit are quite satisfying. Most of the game is well animated in general. I do think there were some odd choices made by the game designers that were jarring to me. Bonk's reactions to consuming meat and dying look very strange. Sound, 6 out of 10. The music is decent and the sound effects are quite nice. I especially like the sound effects when Bonk connects with his attacks, toggles between pile driving and not, and powers up from consuming meat. Control, 7 out of 10. Bonk can jump, bash things with his head, and pile drive down on enemies with his head from above. While in midair, you can toggle between falling normally and pile driving. Doing this technique slows your descent and is crucial for certain areas and bosses. An interesting mechanic in this game is Bonk can attack enemies from below, simply by jumping underneath them and bashing with his head. This does not require pressing the attack button, just jumping. While doing this, you can juggle enemies in the air for quite a few hits, which is very satisfying. Bonk can also grip ledges with his freaking teeth and pull himself up, which looks pretty cool, but leaves him very vulnerable to enemies and it doesn't control super well. While playing through this game, Bonk controlled pretty well for the most part, but I felt like I was taking cheap hits far too often. Gameplay, 8 out of 10. Throughout the game, the player can find a few different power-ups. Smiley faces, which are totaled at the end of each world, granting the player extra lives. Food and heart items, which restore Bonk's health. Mini Bonks, which serve as 1-ups. And pieces of meat, which power him up. When powered up, Bonk can instantly freeze all enemies on the screen by pile driving the ground. Powering up a second time will make him temporarily invincible. The powered up forms wear down with time, with Bonk also depowering if hit by an enemy. Using these powered up forms is pretty fun and one of the most enjoyable parts of the game. Bonk's Adventure consists of 5 separate stages, each with multiple levels. There is Stega Hill, Ruba Cave, Decoton Desert, Boney Bridge, and Enemy Fortress. Each stage ends with a satisfying boss fight, except for the final stage, which has a boss gauntlet of all previous bosses, followed by 2 additional boss fights. While the earlier boss fights can be beaten without testing your abilities to too great of a degree, the final series of bosses requires near perfection if you have stockpiled lives for the final confrontation. The bosses throughout the game consist of Huey, Gladys, Congozilla, Punchy Pedro, T. Raptorhead, and finally King Drool. All earlier bosses appear to actually be good creatures, but are wearing mind-controlling helmets and are forced to fight for King Drool. This game is very generous and continues as you have infinite. If it wasn't for that, I would have been forced to play the early levels many times, as I struggled quite a bit to beat the final stage. The sequel to this game, Bonk's Revenge, does not have infinite continues, and it is quite difficult to get through that game, having to start back at the beginning after losing all your lives. Story, NA. The story is very basic. Essentially, the game's protagonist is Bonk, a strong and bald cave boy who battles prehistoric enemies. Bonk's mission is to rescue Princess Za, a small pink dinosaur girl who has been kidnapped by the evil King Drool, a large green, he looks almost like a Tyrannosaurus Rex type dinosaur. In the arcade version, Bonk is also assisted by a female version of himself, but that character is not present in this game. King Drool has some access to spaceships and futuristic weapons, which seems like an odd design choice, but it's what we're rolling with. Replayability, 5 out of 10. The challenge and fun in this game could definitely lead a player back to this title after beating it. There are some secret areas and hidden power-ups as well for you to discover. Aside from that, there isn't a ton here. Overall score, 6.6 out of 10.